Hey everyone, you know what a sucker I am for historical PAM decks, so it should be no surprise that I have glommed onto a copy of this. This is a deck that came out in June 2020. It is called the 1909 Art Restoration deck. It is put out by a person who goes by the name C in London. This box is super boring and basic, but you can see a little bit of the publication information there. The 1909 Art Restoration deck, 78 cards plus 5 bonus cards. First edition, Drive-Through Cards 2020, and then all the rest. Copyright 2020 Art Restoration by C in London. So I should probably explain why I'm so excited about this deck, and I fully acknowledge that no one keeps the PAM publication timeline in mind, so let's start there. So PAM publication. I'm dyslexic, believe it or not, and one of my things is screwing up my ball and stick letters. So one of the things that we've got to remember is that the very first deck, the Rider deck, came out in 1909. I think that was about October. This has come to be called the Roses and Lilies deck because the back of it has this motif of Tudor roses and these lilies, right? This was the only deck that was published with that back, which I find a little sad. From then there out, 1910 on, with the PAM A, we had this crackle back that's replicated on my study deck. So the 1909 Roses and Lilies deck, that was, let's call it a soft release. The printer put out all these cards, they started to sell them, and the people who were behind the deck were not satisfied with the quality. I'm assuming this would probably be Waite, Ralph Shirley, maybe even the Golden Dawn, who knows. So they more or less did a recall and sent out letters to everyone they knew who had bought, copies of the Roses and Lilies deck and said, hey, we'll replace it with this new printing. So there aren't all that many Roses and Lilies decks that exist today. In fact, I'm pretty sure there's only about 5 copies. So that's kind of scary. So it was replaced in 1910 by the PAM A deck. In 1915, the cardstock got changed, so I kind of call that A2. It's a PAM A deck. It's just thinner cardstock. And then in 1920, what probably ended up happening is Rider changed printers, probably to save money. And the new printers wanted to go with a new printing technology. The A deck had been printed with color lithography, so if you look there at like the fool's face, you see how you can see lines that are going through it? You've got these various lines that layer on top of each other that create color effect. Let me see. From then there out, after the A deck, they did color lithography. This is a copy of my original Rider-Waite Tarot, which is, I think, a C replicant. But if you look at that, you see how the fool's face is made up of all those dots? That's indicative of offset printing. So they changed to offset printing. And first they tried to kind of use the same plates as the PAM A deck, and that was PAM D. But that didn't work out terribly well. There were a lot of quality control issues. The plates weren't lining up, so things were getting super muddy. There were some nice decks, there were some bad decks. So what probably ended up happening is the nicer decks probably got sold with a 1920 key to the tarot in, little box that looked quite like the PAM A. There were probably some other ones that got sold without the key in the blue box like what I have. And at the same time, as they were kind of liquidating off stock of the D, they put the PAM C deck into production. And we know that because they're all the C decks come with a 1920 book. I think maybe even a couple come with a 1910 key. I don't know. So D and C are actually both put out at about the same time. And then somewhere around 1931, Pam B gets put out. That gets also associated with another printing of the key. There were actually like a small number, I believe, printed with the date of 1931, which is where I'm getting that date from, where it said William and Rider 1931, which is kind of interesting because Rider changed his name from William and Rider to Rider and Company in 1926. So there was a little bit of an issue with that, but shortly thereafter they reissued the Key to the Tarot with the correct company name. So there are only a few with this 1931 key. All right, so that is the information I've got on the Pams. I've given you this history lesson because this new deck that I've got should be a pretty faithful representation of this first deck, the one that there's only 5 copies of. This one specifically comes from Saskia Jansen's copy. Saskia had taken high-resolution scans of her deck and made them available to her friend Kenji, who put them on his website, and one thing led to another, and people have been able to see them. Saskia definitely knows that C in London used her deck, and she's totally cool with it, so I don't think that there's an issue there. And I'm excited to see what this deck looks like and how good of a job C did. I guess this is one of the extra cards. Oh, that's nice. Why the heck didn't they put this logo on the box? Like, I know the original decks kind of came in a plain maroon box. I don't know. I would have liked to have seen more logo there somewhere. But we've got a logo. I guess a big enlargement of the Empress face. This, I believe, is supposed to be taking all the major cards and giving them, like, I don't know, 5% transparency or something to that nature, and then stacking them on top of each other. So that, I guess, is an average of what all the majors look like, which is basically one giant mess. Oh, and the back of this has a cool color transformation of the Roses and Lilies with a maroon color. That's really pretty. Looks like we've got 3 cards here that kind of just tell a little bit about the history of the Roses and Lilies, kind of like what I probably just went through. They're talking a little bit about how the idea of this particular deck is to approach it with the same ethos as historical art preservation, which is just minimally editing to preserve as much detail as you can from the original. This is pretty much just taking care of the staining and tweaking the color so that it would look like it would in 1909, which is kind of nice. Very cool. Oh, these have backs. Oh, these must be from the 1909 article in the Occult Review that introduced the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Oh, very cool. Very, very cool. I'm glad those were included. So I guess that brings us to the deck itself. Wow. That's, I can just tell by looking at the Fool that it's a pretty great printing. The face of the Fool looks really nice and clear. I'm just going to pull the study deck Fool here. You can see how it's just light enough that you can, you know, make out the detail and with his eye and his mouth. That's great. It is obvious when you kind of look at the Art Restoration Fool and the Pam A study deck Fool that the Pam A is a bit more color saturated, I guess. The blacks are blacker, etc., etc. All the colors just have more pigmentation going into the paper. This one's a bit of a lighter treatment, but it's very lovely. The colors look actually brighter in the Roses and Lilies compared to the Pam A. My preference might actually be for the Pam A, but this art restoration is really great. Let's take a look at the rest of these cards. These look very clean. I'm definitely seeing less staining than I remember from Saskia's scans. Oh, that's so lovely. I love the Lover's card. It's just so rich. But I bet you that if there is like an original like printing stain, that's probably replicated. Yep. If we take a look here at the face of Strength there, we can see that red dot and the blue dot. That is in pretty much every deck I know of that comes from Saskia scans. Pulling out the pams original from Rial. Yeah, you can see that Rial's Pam original has those same two dots. I'm pretty sure that came from Saskia's deck, but I have no way of knowing that one way or the other. So yeah, like I guess anything that was an actual original printing error is still replicated, which is cool. That gives you like the authenticity. But it does look like the dirt and stains were digitally lifted, and they did a pretty awesome job with that. Oh, I love that Justice. Look at that face. That's great. Oh, I love the texture in that black. The tower has great texture too. Oh, how pretty. There's the moon. These look phenomenal. I am noticing that, you know, toward the edge of the borders, if there is any darkening, that seems to have been kind of kept, I guess. So I don't know if that was like an original part or just, you know, being very conservative with the restoration. Like this is an area that looks like it has a little bit of a stain that isn't completely lifted, but it might have been part of the actual paper as opposed to a full stain. At any rate, these are great. They look vintage without having like that Photoshoppy layer effect put onto them, kind of like the Centennial deck does. The colors are great. The skin tones don't look like everyone's been, you know, stuffing their heads in bags of Cheetos. It's very pretty. I am noticing that many of these cards are a little poorly cut, and I'm not entirely sure if that's a factor of the way the cards were formatted for printing or the printer itself. Looking at the Knight of Swords, which is actually a bigger card than most, if you ever actually look at the Rider originals, all the card images are different sizes, slightly. It's not like Pamela Coleman Smith sat there with a ruler and a protractor and like made everything incredibly uniform. But this one is very, very close to all the corners. I bet you. Let me actually pull out my Knight of Swords here with the study deck. See how all the corners of this image are a lot farther away? Maybe if I move these out, it'll be easier to see. All right. So see how all the corners of the art restoration deck are a lot closer to the edge than the study deck? I'm betting that the images are actually shrunk in this one. Yeah, they are a little bit. See how I've lined up the top borders, but these bottom borders don't line up? There's, I don't know, what would that be? 1/8 of an inch difference, give or take? And that matters. I bet you if we line up Yeah, so similarly big there. I think that if C in London had just shrunk these images down a hot second, it would have made a more neat effect with the cards on the actual, with the images on the actual cards. As you can see, the MPC study deck, there's also some crookedness, like it's not perfectly lined up. This border here is slightly smaller than this border here, but it's less obvious because the edges aren't so, the edges of the image aren't so close to the edges of the cards. So it just gives the optical illusion of being more centered. I'm betting that if C in London had shrunk these images just a hair for formatting, it would have actually looked a lot neater as a project overall. So let's continue on continuing on. Yeah, these images are fantastic. The restoration job is very, very good. I'm not seeing like any crazy stains or anything. Yeah, like I mentioned before, there is some discoloration effect on the card edges, but that is probably just a matter of the card itself. Yeah, I know that there was a lot more staining in this sky, and I can still see some remnants, but it's very faint. Yeah, there's a little bit of some staining left there. A little bit in through there. But it's nowhere near as noticeable as what it was. A little bit maybe in through there. It's very nicely done. I am kind of not digging the lamination. It is definitely picking up light, and it's got this very slick feel, which I'm not overly fond of. And the cards feel flexible. Actually, this is one of my cards from Rial's Pam Original Art Only. This is also done by Drive-Thru Cards, which is why I grabbed it. Okay, so the lamination on both of these cards kind of feels the same. It's just that this is a smooth cardstock, and the Pam's Original Art Only is a linen cardstock, so that kind of helps the rougher texture a little bit. Yeah, the Pam's Original Art Only has a much more flexible cardstock. I bet you they'd be probably about the same height. I'll have to check that out when I'm done with this. But the cardstock's just a little bit more flexible, so it feels flimsy. I really struggle with these last pentacles. That's just great. This is a great production. I'm not a huge fan of the cardstock. Not a huge fan of the lamination. It's cut beautifully, actually. That is a fantastic cut on those cards. I'm sure it'll shuffle fine. Let's give that a try. Yeah, not a problem at all with shuffling. It's just kind of, in comparison with other cards, it just feels a little bit less luxe. So I think I'm very, very glad I got this deck. The art has been restored beautifully. See, props there. This deck would be an absolute stunner though if I think the card images were shrunk just a little bit of a fraction to make sure that they look more centered. And maybe a different printer. Like drive-through cards, they have their purpose, and they do actually really good stuff. If this had just been on the linen cardstock, probably wouldn't have felt as flimsy or as slick, I think, to me, as what this one is. But yeah, I'm not overly fond of this one. So yeah, see if you ever edit this deck, let me know. I will happily get another copy because I am totally loving what you've done with this art. It's great. Thank you so much for kind of dealing with my little flip through. Oh my god, the backs! Those are stunning! Sorry, I got distracted. Those are really lovely blue. Oh wow, great. Okay, yeah. Thank you so much for dealing with me and my crazy flip through of the 1909 art restoration deck. I'm quite a fan. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.